The day my father's will was read, my stepmother flashed a smug smile and calmly announced that I wouldn't be receiving a single dollar from his $70 million estate. Before anyone could react, the family attorney suddenly burst into laughter so hard that he actually had to remove his glasses to wipe his eyes. The conference room at Crawford and Associates carried the unmistakable scent of old wealth that had been untouched for decades. Everything around me spoke of tradition and money: dark mahogany walls, the sharp smell of lemon polish, and leather chairs so old they no longer felt like furniture, but like permanent pieces of the building itself. I'd only been inside that room once before, when I was 7 years old, sitting on my dad's lap while he signed paperwork that meant absolutely nothing to me back then, but would eventually mean everything. As a kid, the room had seemed huge, almost like a sacred place where important things happened. Now, years later, it didn't feel sacred at all. It felt like a stage where everyone already knew their role. My stepmother, Vanessa, had already claimed the spotlight before I even walked through the door. She sat right in the middle of the massive oak table wearing a black dress that clearly wasn't chosen because she was grieving. It wasn't a funeral dress. It was the kind of dress someone wears to a cocktail party or a charity gala. It practically screamed, "Asterisk, I've arrived, and everyone should be paying attention to me." Asterisk. Her fingernails were painted a bold, glossy shade of red that seemed carefully selected to make people notice every movement of her hands. They were long, perfectly manicured, and lightly tapping against the tabletop as if she were counting down the seconds until the show began. She looked straight at me when I entered the room. She didn't bother saying hello. Instead, she simply smiled. The moment I saw that smile, I knew what I'd probably known deep down all along. This was the moment she'd spent the last 6 years working toward. Every bit of patience she'd shown, every calculated move she'd made, every day she'd tolerated a husband whose health was fading, it had all been leading to this payday. This was her grand finale. I quietly took the chair beside the window, folded my hands in my lap, and let her enjoy her victory. I'd been waiting for this day too. The difference was that she had no idea what I'd actually been waiting for. But before I tell you what happened in that conference room, I need to go back a few years, because none of it makes any sense without everything that led up to it. My name is Nathaniel, and I'm 32 years old. For the past 6 years, I've worked as a project manager for a mid-sized construction company. It's honest work. It's demanding work. It's the kind of job that leaves dirt under your fingernails and teaches you early that life usually rewards the people doing the work, not the ones standing around trying to look important. My father, William Crawford, built a real estate empire worth $70 million starting with nothing more than an old pickup truck and a dream, or at least that's how he always liked to describe it. And he wasn't exaggerating. He really did begin with one small property back in 1987, then spent the next 30 years buying buildings, developing land, and holding on to investments that slowly turned into an empire. He was the definition of a self-made man. He looked at an entire city and decided he was going to help build part of it with his own hands. More importantly, he was the greatest father I ever had, although I didn't fully appreciate that until it was far too late. My mom died of cancer when I was 12 years old. It happened fast, and it was unbelievably cruel. After she was gone, Dad raised me by himself. He wasn't the kind of father who gave emotional speeches or filled birthday cards with heartfelt messages. That just wasn't who he was. Instead, he showed up. Every school play, every parent meeting, every disappointing report card, every stupid mistake I made throughout my 20s that I thought would earn me a lecture. He'd simply appear, say very little, and somehow his presence alone always told me everything I needed to hear. When I was 26, Dad met Vanessa. I'd like to tell you I recognized the warning signs immediately. I'd love to pretend I was the kind of person who saw exactly where things were heading and stepped in before it was too late. The truth is, I didn't see any of it. I was 26 years old. Mostly, I was just happy my father wasn't living by himself anymore. That turned out to be the first major mistake I ever made. Only 4 months after they got married, Vanessa moved into the house. She spread through it the same way an invasive species takes over a forest, quietly at first, then suddenly everywhere before anyone realizes what's happened. The home I grew up in, my mother's home, had always felt warm and welcoming. The walls were painted soft shades of yellow. The furniture was comfortable, worn in by years of family memories, shaped by the people who had loved that house. Every morning smelled like fresh coffee. Most afternoons smelled like something baking in the oven. Just 6 weeks after Vanessa moved in, the entire place felt like a museum. Cold marble replaced warmth. Expensive white furniture appeared that nobody was allowed to sit on. The color scheme looked like something copied from an interior design board dedicated to emotional emptiness. She didn't simply redecorate the house. She stripped its soul away. She worked through it methodically, one room after another, as if she were performing an exorcism. The first real victim of all those changes was Angela. Angela Flores had worked in our home since the day I was born. She held me while I cried at my mother's funeral. For the 2 years after Mom died, when Dad sometimes became so overwhelmed that he forgot to eat, Angela quietly made sure he had dinner every single night. She wasn't just an employee. She was one of the last living connections to the life our family used to have. 3 months after moving into the house, Vanessa fired her on a Tuesday. She accused Angela of stealing silverware. 30 years of loyalty disappeared because of one accusation, one cardboard box, and a walk down the front steps. I arrived for Sunday dinner and found Angela sitting outside crying. I marched straight into the house, ready to start a war. Dad was sitting alone in his study, staring silently out the window. He looked smaller somehow. Not physically. It was as if something essential had been taken out of him. Something invisible that had quietly changed who he was. "Dad, it's Angela," I said. Without turning around, he answered in a hollow voice. "Vanessa needs to run the house her way." After a long pause, he quietly added, "It's just easier this way, son." That became the pattern for the next 6 years. My father had stared down labor strikes. He'd negotiated contracts so aggressively that grown businessmen left meetings in tears. He'd built a multi-million-dollar company because he never backed down from anyone. Yet somehow, every single time Vanessa pushed him, he folded completely. He kept choosing peace instead of justice. At the time, I couldn't understand it. Now I can. He was lonely. And unless you've watched your spouse die and then face turning 60 in an empty house that no longer feels like home, it's difficult to understand how powerful that loneliness can become. Vanessa understood it perfectly, and she kept pushing. Dad's longtime friends slowly stopped coming around. His golf buddies eventually admitted to me that Vanessa made every visit uncomfortable. She criticized their jokes. She complained about their politics. She even found reasons to criticize muddy footprints on the floor. One after another, people who had spent decades beside my father quietly disappeared from his life. Vanessa filled the empty space with charity luncheons, fancy social events, and carefully staged social media pictures of the two of them smiling in Tuscany. Then came the isolation. Whenever I called the house, Vanessa answered, "He's resting." Or she'd say, "He's having one of his difficult days, Nathaniel. You know how he gets." Then she'd softly add, "I really don't want him getting upset." When Dad was diagnosed with Parkinson's disease, along with early-stage heart failure, Vanessa stepped fully into her new role. She became the devoted wife, the exhausted caregiver, the heroic woman sacrificing everything to care for a once great man. And somehow, I became the villain. One afternoon, she stopped me at the front door while Ty stood silently behind her like a bodyguard. "The doctor said he shouldn't have unmanaged visitors," she said. "His blood pressure goes up every time you leave." "I'm his son," I answered. She looked me directly in the eye. "You're a source of stress." Then she shut the door in my face. I stood there on the front porch of the house where I'd grown up, staring at my father's bedroom window. For the first time since I was 12 years old, I felt that same crushing helplessness all over again. It was the feeling of watching someone you love slowly disappear while everyone around you insists it's happening for their own good. What Vanessa didn't realize was that she had overlooked one person. Samuel. Samuel Brooks had been my father's head gardener for 22 years. He was 60 years old, rough around the edges, fiercely loyal, and the kind of man whose loyalty had been earned only after years of proving himself through every test life threw at him. Samuel hated Vanessa with the kind of deep, personal resentment that only comes from watching someone try to rip out your late employer's wife's rose garden just to build a meditation deck. About 8 months before Dad passed away, on a cold evening in February, I was sitting in my car a block away from the house when Samuel walked up and knocked on my window. "The gate code is 4492, he said without bothering with small talk. "The back door will be unlocked at 2 in the morning. Nurse Emily is working tonight." He paused for a second before adding, "She can't stand Vanessa." I stared at him, confused. "Samuel?" "Your father asked," he replied simply. Then he turned around and walked away. That night, I slipped into the house I had grown up in like I was breaking into a stranger's home. I crept quietly upstairs, carefully stepping over the 3rd stair from the top, the same one that had squeaked ever since I was 15 and sneaking out to parties. The house was silent. Worse than silent. It smelled wrong. The air carried that strange mix of bleach and expensive perfume that makes a place feel perfectly clean but completely lifeless, as though nobody actually lived there anymore. They only maintained it. Dad's bedroom was at the end of the hallway. I eased the door open. For months, Vanessa had been telling everyone at her charity lunches that William barely recognized anyone anymore. She painted a picture of a man who had mentally disappeared, while she played the role of the endlessly devoted wife caring for him through such a tragic decline. The second I opened the door, Dad's eyes flew open. They were tired. They were filled with pain. But they were completely clear. There wasn't a trace of confusion. "Nate," he said. I hurried to his bedside, took his hand, and for a few seconds I couldn't force a single word out. Finally I managed to say, "I tried to come sooner." She kept stopping me. "I know," he answered quietly. He squeezed my hand. His grip was much stronger than I expected from someone in his condition. "She tells me you never call," he said. "She says you're just waiting for me to die so you can sell everything. You know that's not true." "I do." He slowly pulled me a little closer until I had to lean in to hear him. His voice dropped to barely more than a whisper. "I need to ask you something. And I need you to tell me the truth. How have they treated you?" He paused. "Vanessa, Ty, Chloe, have they shown you any kindness at all?" I looked at my father's face. The illness had hollowed him out, but there was something even heavier behind his eyes than the disease itself. "No, Dad. They treat me like I'm dirt beneath their shoes. They treat everybody that way. They've been spending your money on luxury watches and expensive vacations while you've been lying here." He slowly closed his eyes. One tear rolled down his cheek. When he opened them again, something had changed. For just a moment, I saw the old William Crawford again. The man who had stared down union strikes without flinching. The man who had built an empire from almost nothing. "Good," he whispered. I stared at him, completely confused. "I had to know," he rasped. "I gave them 6 years, Nathan. 6 full years to choose what kind of people they wanted to be. I needed to see what they would do." He paused, catching his breath before continuing. "I need you to promise me something. No matter what happens during the reading of the will. No matter what she says. No matter how certain she is that she's won. Wait. Let her play every card she has. Let everyone in that room see exactly who she really is." "Dad, we can hire a lawyer," I said. "We can challenge the will." He slowly shook his head. "Not yet." His fingers tightened around mine. "A trap only works if the prey believes it's safe. Sullivan knows everything. When I'm gone, talk to Sullivan. Until then, stay quiet." We sat together for nearly an hour after that. We never talked about money again. Instead, we talked about Mom. We remembered the fishing trip we took to Montana when I was 9 years old, and the rainbow trout I'd proudly caught before Dad made me throw it back, because he said it was still too young. We said goodbye without ever actually saying goodbye. That's just how the Crawford men handled things. I slipped out before sunrise. It was the last time I ever saw my father alive. The phone call came on a Thursday morning in March. It wasn't Vanessa who called. She couldn't even be bothered to do that herself. Her assistant made the call instead. The funeral took place 4 days later. Vanessa managed the entire event the same way someone would organize the launch of a luxury product. She wore elegant black lace. Her tears appeared at exactly the right moments. After the service, she hosted a reception at the house and worked the room like a politician at a fundraiser, collecting sympathy from guests the way some people collect reward points on their credit cards. I stood alone near the back of the church, watching all of it unfold. And I remembered what Dad had told me. Asterisk, let them show everyone who they are. Asterisk. So I did. Which brings us back to that conference room. Vanessa sat confidently at the center of the table, her red nails still tapping softly against the wood. Ty, who was 25, wore sunglasses indoors while talking nonstop about the Ferrari he'd already asked the dealership to hold for him. Chloe, 22 years old, was completely absorbed in a travel brochure for the Maldives, giving it far more attention than she'd ever shown her stepfather during his hospital stays. The red interior looks good, Ty said, barely looking up, but the red exterior with the black interior is the one that really stands out. They'll hold it until Friday, he continued. But we need the money transferred today. We'll take care of it, baby, Vanessa said with complete confidence as she gently patted his hand. Those bright red nails again. That calm, possessive confidence. She looked directly at me across the table. I hope you didn't miss too much work coming here, Nathaniel, she said sweetly. I know hourly jobs can be. I'm fine, Vanessa, I interrupted. I'm only here to hear Dad's final wishes. She let out a quiet little laugh. His wishes? William made those perfectly clear. We updated everything 6 years ago. The estate belongs to the immediate family. She emphasized the word immediate as if she wanted it to sting. The family that was actually there for him. Ty added without even lifting his eyes from his phone. I bit the inside of my cheek. I didn't say a word. A trap only works when the prey believes it's completely safe. Mr. Sullivan will see you now. Michael Sullivan had served as my father's attorney for 40 years. He'd been his friend even longer. He was 68 years old, built like a retired linebacker, with the face of someone who'd spent decades watching every ugly side of human nature while somehow never losing his ability to keep a perfectly straight face. In all the years I'd known him, I'd never once seen him shaken. But today, something was different. I couldn't immediately put a name to it. His face was slightly red. His eyes seemed unusually bright. As he carefully arranged the folders on his desk, every movement felt almost overly controlled, like he was working incredibly hard to keep something inside from spilling out. Vanessa immediately claimed the large chair directly across from him. Ty and Chloe sat beside her. I quietly took my usual seat by the window. "Let's make this quick, Michael," Vanessa said as she crossed her legs. "We've got a meeting with a real estate agent this afternoon. Just read the will, give us access to the accounts, and we can all move on." Sullivan slowly looked at her over the top of his reading glasses. "My condolences on William's passing. He was one of the finest men I've ever had the privilege of knowing." Yes, Vanessa replied impatiently. "Very sad. Now, the inheritance." Sullivan cleared his throat before picking up the first document. "I have before me the last will and testament of William Edward Crawford, executed 6 years ago." "See," Vanessa said, throwing me a smug glance sharp enough to cut. "I told you." Sullivan looked back down at the papers. "Dated 6 years ago," he repeated. "However." "There is no however," Vanessa interrupted as she leaned forward. "I helped draft that will. It leaves the entire estate to me. It includes provisions for Ty and Chloe's education and living expenses. And it specifically disinherits Nathaniel." She slowly turned toward me, enjoying every second of it. "You get absolutely nothing, Nathaniel. Not $1. Not the houses. Not the cars. Not even those dusty old books you were always obsessed with." She smiled wider. "After 6 years of marriage, I finally convinced William to see the truth about his ungrateful, absent son." The room fell completely silent. Ty was the first one to break it. He let out a little laugh and smirked at me. "Man, sucks to be you, bro." For the first time since we'd sat down, Chloe finally looked up from her Maldives brochure. Even though I already knew what was coming, hearing those words still hit me. Knowing the truth doesn't stop your chest from tightening when someone tells you your own father left you with nothing. So I stayed quiet. I didn't react. Instead, I watched Sullivan. His eyes were fixed on the papers in front of him. Then I heard it. It was so faint at first I almost thought I'd imagined it. A low rumble came from deep in his chest, like someone desperately trying to hold back a laugh. He quickly covered his mouth with one hand. His shoulders started shaking. His face turned bright red. And then something happened that I never would have believed if I hadn't seen it with my own eyes. Michael Sullivan, a man who had spent 40 years as one of the most respected attorneys in the city, my father's closest friend, and the very definition of professionalism, completely lost it. He didn't clear his throat. He didn't politely chuckle. He burst into full, uncontrollable laughter. The sound echoed around the mahogany conference room, filling every corner. He laughed so hard his glasses fogged up. He actually had to take them off and wipe tears from his eyes with a silk handkerchief. Across the table, Vanessa's expression changed almost by the second. Confusion, offense, then pure rage. It happened so quickly it felt like watching a slideshow. "How dare you," she snapped. "My husband is dead. This is supposed to be a solemn." "I sincerely apologize," Sullivan managed between breaths as he wiped his eyes. Then he glanced at me, just for an instant. A tiny wink. It disappeared almost as soon as it happened. He straightened himself, carefully put his glasses back on, and the laughter vanished from his face as though someone had flipped a switch. When he spoke again, his voice was calm, flat, and somehow far more intimidating than if he'd been shouting. "You really don't know, do you, Vanessa? You honestly believe that document from 6 years ago tells the whole story?" "It does tell the whole story," she shot back immediately. "Oh," Sullivan said quietly. "You certainly played an impressive game. But you made one fatal mistake." He leaned slightly forward. "You assumed William Crawford built a $70 million empire by being blind. What happened over the next 45 minutes was unlike anything I'd ever witnessed. It was like watching someone's confidence get dismantled one carefully measured piece at a time." Sullivan never raised his voice. He never rushed. He simply guided them through every detail with the calm precision of a man who had spent months preparing for this exact moment and intended to enjoy every second of it. He began by explaining the Crawford family revocable trust. It had been created 25 years earlier. That trust, not the will, had always held everything my father truly owned. Then Sullivan explained something Vanessa had apparently never bothered to learn. A will only controls property someone personally owns when they die. It doesn't control assets already placed inside a trust. 15 months earlier, Dad had completely rewritten that trust. Not only had it been updated, it had been converted into an irrevocable trust that legally replaced every version before it. The documents had been thoroughly reviewed by Dr. Rebecca Lawson, J.D., a nationally respected trust and estate specialist with 3 decades of experience. Vanessa let out a nervous laugh. That's impossible. I was with him every single day. I monitored his mail. I monitored his. You monitored the front door, Sullivan interrupted. You didn't monitor the garden entrance. And you certainly weren't expecting a private notary to make a house call at 2 o'clock in the morning. I watched the color slowly drain from Vanessa's face. Her makeup suddenly looked like it had been painted onto empty space. He was sick, she said weakly. He wasn't mentally competent. I'll challenge the trust. I'll have the whole thing thrown out. Without showing the slightest emotion, Sullivan opened another folder. On the day William signed the amended trust, he said, he completed a 4-hour cognitive examination administered by Dr. Daniel Whitmore. He glanced down at the report. Dr. Whitmore has practiced geriatric neurology for 26 years and previously served as chief of neurology at Mercy General. Sullivan slid the report across the table. His conclusion reads as follows. William Crawford scored 29 out of 30 on the mild cognitive impairment assessment. He looked directly at Vanessa before continuing. Mr. Crawford demonstrated exceptional clarity of reasoning and a complete voluntary understanding of every asset under consideration. Then Sullivan read the final sentence. There is no clinical basis whatsoever to challenge his legal capacity. Vanessa stared silently at the report lying in front of her. There is something else, Sullivan continued. The signing was recorded on video. Mr. Crawford personally explains every decision he made. He discusses dates. He discusses dollar amounts. He identifies specific events. After a brief pause, Sullivan asked almost politely, would you like to watch the recording now? Or would you rather save that experience for your attorneys? The silence inside the room had completely changed. Before, it had simply been quiet. Now it felt heavy, dense, like everyone could physically feel it pressing down on them. Finally, Chloe spoke. Her voice was barely above a whisper. Who's the beneficiary? The contour makeup couldn't hide how pale she'd become. Without saying a word, Sullivan slowly raised one finger and pointed directly at me. 15 months ago, he said, William Crawford resigned as trustee. Upon that resignation, the trust immediately appointed a new trustee. At that same moment, legal ownership of every asset transferred to the trust's sole beneficiary. He paused long enough for every word to sink in. That beneficiary has legally owned the Crawford estate, the homes, the investment accounts, and the company. For the last 15 months, no one moved. No one spoke. Then Sullivan quietly added, the house you've been living in belongs to Nathaniel. He looked toward Ty. The car you drove here this morning belongs to Nathaniel. Then his eyes returned to Vanessa. And every credit card bill you've been paying for the last year and a half has been paid with Nathaniel's money. Ty jumped to his feet so fast that his chair slammed backward into the wall. That's impossible. I checked the accounts yesterday. There's still $3 million sitting in the checking account. Yes, Sullivan answered calmly. There is. Because Nathaniel chose to leave it there. Every face in the room slowly turned toward me. I stood up without hurrying, walked over to the window, and looked out across the skyline my father had spent decades helping build. Then I turned back to face them. Dad wanted to give all of you one final chance, I said. He told me, Nathan, if they take care of me because they love me and not because they're expecting a payout, then we share everything. He said that if Vanessa treated me with kindness, if she proved she was truly a decent person, we would make sure she was taken care of. I took another slow step toward the table. Those were his exact words. So I watched. For 15 months. I watched every single one of you. I looked directly at Ty. I watched you charge a $40,000 Rolex to the corporate account during the same week Dad was lying in the ICU. Then I turned toward Chloe. I watched you skip his birthday because you'd rather go to Coachella. Finally, my eyes settled on Vanessa. And I watched you stand in front of people at your charity lunches telling everyone William had lost his mind, while he was upstairs fully aware of every single thing happening around him. We were married. Vanessa screamed, finally finding her voice again. I have rights. I'm entitled to spousal support. This is abuse. You can't just. Let's talk about abuse, Sullivan interrupted. There wasn't even the smallest trace of laughter left in his voice. He reached into his briefcase and pulled out a plain black folder. 36 months ago, William Crawford hired a private investigator. The investigator's name is Victor Collins. He spent 20 years working in fraud and asset investigations. Before that, he served in the Financial Crimes Unit of the State Bureau. Sullivan opened the folder. Then, with slow, deliberate movements, he placed 3 separate stacks of documents on the conference table. Each stack landed neatly face up, almost like he was dealing cards in a poker game. The first stack, he said, contains records documenting $2.4 million in expenditures made from the trust during the past 15 months. He looked directly at Vanessa, and as I just explained, those funds legally belonged to Nathaniel. He picked up the top page. Let's begin with the $50,000 spiritual retreat in Sedona. It took place during the exact week William Crawford was admitted to the intensive care unit. The next item, Sullivan continued, is a consulting salary of $10,000 a month paid to Ty. He looked over the top of his glasses. For a consulting position that records show he never actually performed. Ty shifted in his chair, but didn't say anything. Sullivan kept going. There are also 17 luxury purchases totaling more than $280,000, all charged to a credit card connected directly to the trust. That money was. Vanessa began. Nathaniel's, Sullivan interrupted in a calm, even voice. Every single dollar. He reached for another stack of documents. The second file, he said as he slid several photographs across the table, contains observations collected by the investigator over the course of 22 months. He paused before adding, I won't describe what's in them. You'll recognize yourself. Vanessa slowly looked down at the first photograph. It showed a luxury hotel in Cabo. She was holding hands with a man who definitely wasn't my father. No one said a word. The silence that settled over the room was unlike anything we'd experienced up to that point. Her jaw locked tight. Her perfectly polished red fingernails pressed hard against the tabletop. Then Sullivan reached for the final folder. His voice had become almost whisper quiet. This last file is the one William struggled with. He hoped it would never have to be used. Very carefully, he placed the worn folder on the table. Inside was an old police report. The edges had yellowed with age. It came from Ohio. I quietly read the name. Richard Holloway. Your first husband. Sullivan nodded. Richard Holloway died 15 years ago. The official cause was an accidental overdose of heart medication. The investigation ended with an inconclusive ruling. For a moment, Vanessa completely stopped moving. Even her breathing seemed to disappear. The investigator located pharmacy records, Sullivan continued. They show you refilled Mr. Holloway's prescription just 2 days before his death. The refill reflected double his normal dosage. And according to the records, you were personally responsible for administering his medication, just as you later administered William Crawford's. That's a lie, Vanessa whispered. I finally spoke. Dad secretly had his blood tested 6 months ago. No one knew. He submitted the sample to an independent toxicology lab under a false name. The report found 3 separate sedatives in his bloodstream. None of them had ever been prescribed. The concentrations were high enough to explain why he'd been complaining for months about feeling constantly groggy. By then, it felt like the rest of the world had disappeared. There was no conference room anymore. No city outside. Just the 4 of us. And the evidence spread across that table. We haven't taken any of this to the district attorney, I said. We haven't asked Ohio to reopen Richard Holloway's case. My father didn't want his family name dragged through a murder trial. He wanted peace. I'll leave, Vanessa blurted out immediately. I'll go. Right now. You'll do more than leave, Sullivan replied. He opened a small petty cash drawer beside his desk. Then, without saying a word, he took out 3 crisp $1 bills. He placed one in front of Vanessa, one in front of Ty, and one in front of Chloe. Finally, he picked up the will. To my wife, Vanessa. I leave the sum of $1. To my stepson, Tyler. $1. To my stepdaughter, Chloe. $1. He looked up from the page. This amount is intentionally designated to prevent any beneficiary from claiming they were accidentally forgotten. He paused. They were not forgotten. They were remembered. Very deliberately. No one moved. No one even seemed to breathe. After several long seconds, I reached inside my jacket. I removed 3 sealed envelopes and laid them neatly on the table. These are eviction notices. They're being formally served here today in the presence of legal counsel. You have 24 hours to leave the property. A security company will arrive at the house in approximately 40 minutes. They'll supervise the removal of your personal belongings. You may take your clothing, your toiletries, and anything you can prove you purchased using your own documented funds. Chloe finally managed to ask. The furniture? It stays, Sullivan answered. It belongs to the trust. 24 hours isn't enough time, Vanessa protested. Then I'd suggest you start packing immediately. For the first time since the meeting began, I looked directly into her eyes. Because tomorrow at 1 o'clock in the afternoon, I'm changing every lock on that house. And at 1 minute past 1, anyone still on the property will be arrested for trespassing. I'll let the next sentence hang in the air. especially considering there is already documented evidence involving the suspected poisoning of the property's owner. Vanessa stared down at the dollar bill, then at the eviction notice, then at the black investigation folder. Without another word, she stood up. She picked up her purse. She left the dollar lying exactly where Sullivan had placed it. Just before walking out, she turned back toward me. "You're a monster. William would be ashamed of you." I let her have the last dramatic line. "It was William's plan," I answered quietly. "I simply carried it out." The door closed behind her with a soft click. For a long moment, nobody spoke. Then Sullivan slowly exhaled. It sounded like the breath of a man who'd been holding it for 6 years. He leaned back in his chair. Honestly, he looked 10 years younger. "That," he said softly, "went exactly the way William believed it would." After that day, justice didn't arrive all at once. It rarely does. Instead, it unfolded little by little over the following months. Almost like an old debt finally being repaid one installment at a time. That afternoon I drove back to the house, but parked a little way down the street. I didn't want to interfere. I simply watched. A rental moving van slowly backed into the driveway. Ty carried box after box of expensive designer sneakers with the angry frustration of someone discovering for the first time that money can disappear. Chloe stood on the front lawn crying. She held nothing but a large garbage bag full of clothes. The glossy Maldives travel brochure was nowhere to be seen. I never went inside. I didn't need to. Dad had been right about that too. The satisfaction wasn't in rubbing their faces in defeat. It was simply watching them leave without a word. The following morning, around 10 o'clock, I drove back. The moving van was gone. The house sat quietly waiting for me. I typed the familiar security code into the keypad. It was still my birthday. It had always been my birthday. The front door unlocked. Inside, the hallway was completely empty. They'd taken everything that truly belonged to them. What remained was the cold marble floor, the untouched white furniture, and every lifeless decorating choice Vanessa had imposed on the house over the years. On the kitchen counter sat a ring of keys beside a handwritten note. I recognized Vanessa's sharp handwriting immediately. Asterisk, hope you rot in this big, empty house. Asterisk. I read it once, crumpled it into a ball, and dropped it straight into the trash. A second later, my phone buzzed. It was a text from Olivia, my fiancée. I deliberately kept her far away from all of this because I refused to let Vanessa use her as another weapon. "Is it over?" I smiled. "It's over." A reply came almost instantly. "I'm on my way, bringing pizza and paint. We're fixing the living room tonight. For the first time in weeks." I laughed. "Make it yellow," I texted back. "Just like it used to be." About 40 minutes later, Samuel's old pickup rolled into the driveway. He climbed out carrying a shovel in one hand and a small potted rose bush in the other. He stood there for a minute looking at the house. Then he spit into the grass. "So, I hear the witch finally moved out." "She did." Samuel nodded. Then he reached into his jacket and handed me a sealed envelope. "Your father gave me this 6 months ago. He told me not to open it until the house was clean again." Inside was a letter written in Dad's unmistakable handwriting. Asterisk Samuel, asterisk. Asterisk if you're reading this, then Nate is finally home. Asterisk. Asterisk I've left something for you inside the trust. Asterisk. Asterisk enough money for retirement. Asterisk. Asterisk or enough to rebuild the rose garden you've been missing for the last 6 years. Asterisk. Asterisk your choice. Asterisk. Asterisk take care of my boy. Asterisk. Samuel cleared his throat. His jaw tightened as he quietly folded the letter. $50,000, he muttered. The old fool. I would have planted those roses for free. "So?" I asked with a grin. "You're retiring?" He snorted. "Those hybrid tea roses aren't going to prune themselves." With that, he grabbed his shovel and headed toward the garden shed as if he'd never been gone at all. 3 months after the will reading, another letter arrived. It was from Sullivan. I was sitting on the back patio in brand new outdoor furniture. Comfortable furniture. The kind people are actually meant to sit on. Across the yard, Samuel was restoring the rose beds where Vanessa's ridiculous gravel meditation deck had once been. By then, Samuel had already replanted my mother's favorite flowers. Golden celebration roses. Bright yellow. Exactly the way she had always loved them. Sullivan's letter was only 2 pages long, but every line mattered. According to the update, the Ohio District Attorney had quietly reopened the investigation into Richard Holloway's death after receiving anonymous information from our investigator, Victor Collins. At the same time, the insurance company that had paid out after Richard died had started its own fraud investigation. As a result, all of Vanessa's assets had been frozen while the investigations moved forward. She was no longer living in a mansion. She had moved into a modest 2-bedroom apartment on the other side of town. And because she could no longer afford private counsel, she was now being represented by a public defender. At the bottom of the letter, Sullivan had added a short postscript almost as an afterthought. Asterisk Ty was seen working as a valet at Hillcrest Country Club last Thursday. Asterisk. Asterisk the same club where he used to walk in as a member using your father's account. Asterisk. Asterisk I thought you might appreciate knowing that. Asterisk. I folded the letter and set it aside. Oddly enough, I didn't feel triumphant. Not really. What I felt was harder to describe. It reminded me of finally noticing that an old injury had stopped hurting. The kind of pain you've carried for so many years that you've forgotten life without it. Then one morning you realize it's simply gone. I walked into Dad's study because there was still one last thing I needed to do. In the final letter he'd left for Sullivan, there had been one private note that wasn't meant to be read during the will meeting. It had been written only for me. Asterisk Nathan. Asterisk. Asterisk once the house is yours again. Check the false bottom in the third drawer of my desk. Asterisk. Asterisk I hid something there the day Vanessa asked where your mother's engagement ring was. Asterisk. Asterisk I told her I'd lost it. Asterisk. I sat behind the old mahogany desk where my father had spent decades building everything he owned. Slowly, I opened the third drawer. Then I ran my fingers along the inside edge exactly the way Dad had taught me years earlier while we played hide-and-seek around the house. My thumb found a tiny hidden latch. Click. The false bottom lifted open. There were only two things inside. A small velvet jewelry box and an old leather notebook. I opened the box first. Inside rested my mother's engagement ring. A beautiful solitaire diamond. Simple. Elegant. The same ring Dad had bought when all he had was an old truck and an impossible dream. Vanessa had always wanted him to replace it with something bigger and more expensive. Instead, he'd hidden it. He'd rather keep it secret than risk letting her have it. I smiled to myself. I found it, Dad. She never got anywhere near it. Then I opened the notebook. It wasn't a journal. It was a ledger. Every page was filled with neat handwritten columns. Names. Dates. Dollar amounts. Reasons. One entry read. Asterisk August 2019. Asterisk. Asterisk Sophia Bennett. Asterisk. Asterisk $15,000. Asterisk. Asterisk college tuition. Sophomore year. Asterisk. I recognized the name immediately. Angela's granddaughter. The next page listed another. Asterisk January 2020. Asterisk. Asterisk Ethan Cooper. Asterisk. Asterisk $12,000. Asterisk. Asterisk small business startup. Asterisk. Asterisk loan forgiven. Asterisk. Ethan was Samuel's son. I kept turning pages. Faster and faster. There were dozens of names. The driver Vanessa had fired because she thought he talked too much. The receptionist from Dad's old office who needed help paying for surgery. Former employees. Neighbors. Friends. People who had simply shown my father kindness over the years. While Vanessa had been spending money on designer handbags and luxury vacations, Dad had quietly been running his own private charity. Not through some flashy foundation. Not through expensive galas. Just through handwritten notes, late-night decisions, and quiet acts of generosity that no one else ever knew about. He'd been giving away pieces of his fortune to people who had stood beside him when they didn't have to. For 6 years I'd been angry with him. I'd convinced myself he'd surrendered to Vanessa, that he'd become weak, that he'd simply given up. Now I finally understood. He hadn't stopped fighting. He'd just been fighting a completely different battle. One built on kindness instead of confrontation. A quiet little resistance movement hidden right under Vanessa's nose. Tucked into the back cover of the ledger was one final note. Asterisk Nathan. Asterisk. Asterisk the trust includes a separate account called the Crawford Education Initiative. Asterisk. Asterisk it's already funded. Asterisk. Asterisk keep it going. Asterisk. Asterisk Vanessa wanted to become a queen. Asterisk. Asterisk I'd rather be remembered as a good neighbor. Asterisk. Asterisk don't let money harden your heart, son. Asterisk. Asterisk use it to make life a little easier for people who already have enough hardships of their own. Asterisk. I closed the notebook. Pressed it gently against my forehead. I promise, I whispered. That evening, Olivia came over carrying 2 large pizzas and a gallon of warm yellow paint. We ate dinner using my mother's china, which we'd rescued from the attic after Vanessa had hidden it away years earlier. Angela had already returned to work. This time she came back with double the salary Dad had paid her, plus a pension plan. She busied herself around the kitchen pretending she couldn't hear our conversation. Neither of us believed that act for a second. After dinner, Olivia and I walked out into the garden. The sky had begun turning that deep purple color that only appears just before night fully settles in. I didn't prepare a speech. Dad had never been the speech-making type. Neither was I. Instead, I reached into my pocket and took out the little velvet box. He protected this, I told her. He kept it hidden for 6 years because he knew someday it would matter. I looked down at the ring. I honestly think he always knew who it was meant for. Olivia looked at the diamond. She never asked whether it would fit. She never asked about the prenuptial agreement Sullivan insisted we sign. She simply smiled and said yes. A few yards away, Samuel was definitely not pretending to prune rose bushes in complete darkness while absolutely not listening to every word. He never made a sound. Around us, the yellow roses glowed softly beneath the moonlight. And somewhere in that quiet moment, inside a home that had finally become warm again, filled with honest work, good people, and the kind of family that shows up when it matters, I realized my father had given me the greatest inheritance he possibly could. It wasn't the $70 million. It wasn't the houses. It wasn't the company. It wasn't any of the buildings he'd spent his life creating. It was the chance to become the kind of man he had spent my whole life teaching me to be.